Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Salim Badat for Living Islam. Today we have two esteemed guests. One is Professor Suleiman Dango, and we have Brother Ibrahim Jadwid. Welcome to this program.
Thank you for inviting us.
So today's conversation is the Muslim traders that came to settle in KZN. So this is going to be addressed to Professor Dango as well as Brother Ibrahim Jadwid. So Prof, so if you can give us the history of, number one, why did they come to South Africa? What were they doing in India? And first we start off there.
Yeah, okay. Just remember the British colonized India. It was, I think, 1857. And then also colonized Natal, 1860. And then they needed people, they started growing sugar. So they needed workers.
Right.
For the sugar cane plantation and so on. So they decided to bring what they call the indentured Indians. That means people who had a contract to come and work on the sugar cane farms. So they were the first one who came. Now, among them, probably 8% were Muslims, few Christians. So we would say over 90% were actually Hindu. Then the Muslims, mainly from the Gujarat area, the business people, said, look here, we got an opportunity to come to South Africa, this British colony. So we come here and we'll start some business. So a few of them started coming here. Some went to Mauritius, and then later they came to South Africa. Others went to the north, from Mozambique. They made their way down here. So we had a few of them started small way. And as time went on, they started expanding and so on.
So which was the first ship of traders that came to South Africa?
Remember, it was a Truro, but it came with the first lot
of traders.
Were there the traders also?
No, there were traders in the
Okay.
All right. Now, what happened? Just to give one example, how they actually expanded. We take this story of Manjaras.
Right.
Now, Mr. Manjara, we saw his father, was selling newspapers on the street corners.
Right.
Okay. And
where
it was the street corners in Durban.
Oh, in Durban.
Right. So one of the businessmen saw him. It was raining, and he felt sorry for him. He said, "This poor boy here selling newspapers." So he went to Mullah's cafe.
Right.
And he spoke to Mr. Mullah. He said, this youngster, why didn't you give him a job? So he said, okay, because Mullah's Cafe, they used to, they had people buying some small eats and so on. So his job was to serve water. Right? So he was a waiter just serving water. Then Mr. Mullah said, I can teach you to make jalebi.
Right.
So he learned to make jalebi, and he used to go to Grey Street Mosque and sell the jalebi, right? Big nights and so on, right? So he started with jalebi. Then Mr. Mullah taught him how to do a bit of cooking, and then he started. Then he started his little small business in Cathedral Road. I think there was a club there, so he started cooking for them there. Then he put his own little shop. Now see where Manjaras is.
Sure.
Expanded. The sons, many of them got their own businesses now, and most of the functions you will see Manjaras there, right? Weddings and so on. So now they even got their own restaurant there. They got a takeaway. There's big queues every day. Got a next restaurant, so there are walimas, weddings, and all taking place. But I'm just showing you. It started with somebody standing on a street corner selling newspapers, and see where Manjaras are. So in that way, there are a number of families who also started very small. Some started as hawkers.
Okay.
They were actually hawkers.
And what contract did they have with the South African government at the time?
No, because this was a British colony. Yeah.
The British colony. So like the
but what happened? The British, as time went on, when the Muslim business started expanding, the British businessmen saw them as competitors.
Right.
And they wanted to send them back to India, right? So they had to fight for business rights, and they had to fight for residential rights.
Right.
Because they didn't want to go back.
Right.
So they had to fight the British government, and that's how Gandhi was then brought by the one family,
Dada Abdullah.
that Abdullah, who had a dispute with a family in Pretoria.
Right.
So he was brought down to fight against another Muslim brother in
Right.
Pretoria.
Right.
And while he was here, then they, started. Now this firm, NIC, Natal Indian Congress, was formed in the home of a Muslim, right?
Okay.
And the first maybe 6, 7 presidents all Muslim,
Okay.
right? So NIC was established by Muslims. Most of the office bearers were Muslims, the presidents, the secretaries, and so on and so forth. Abu Bakr Ahmad.
Okay.
And then the first masjid was also established by Abu Bakr Ahmad, and of course the others came in. That's the Grey Street Mosque. So one of the things that the traders did wherever they went, of course from here they started moving out. And of course then you had a whole lot of Muslim traders moving to the Transvaal,
Right.
right? And they started establishing all over the country towns.
Right.
You go to the country towns, they were all over the show.
Right.
And in Natal, the same thing happened. They started moving into the country towns. So you find little shops
Sure.
all over, right?
General dealing shops mainly. General dealer
It
shops.
is just general.
General dealer. Yeah.
Like my father was running a business near Carolina. It was a
Right.
farm shop.
Sure.
So basically sell everything,
Sure,
lots
sure.
of everything.
Yeah.
Because there's no other shop
Sure.
around the corner. So this is how they started. And of course then I asked Babu to add to, that was just an introduction. Babu, you can talk.
About the business.
Okay, you know, the thing that strikes me is that
Yes.
the introduction,
You have him in the. You have him in the shot. Okay.
like, the introduction of Islam. My grandmother, who lived to the age of 95, told me about the people that came in their dhows, right? And they were very well received. Now, at that time, the Tapti River in Gujarat was a big river, a navigable river, until they built the dam. And these people came in their dhows, and they were well received, and there was intermarriage.
So now we're going back to India now, right?
Going back
so,
to India,
so
going back to where we came from.
Okay.
So in other words, we took Islam and trade
Right.
from our people that came.
Right.
And these were the people who were trading in the Arabian Sea,
Right.
from Yemen to the Arabian, this thing, to Iraq, to Syria, to Iran and Afghanistan. So a lot of our names, I try to trace back our names. This is just a little departure. And I find that there are some common names, few common names between us and the Hindu,
Right.
Banya people,
Right.
like
Patel,
Patel,
Desai.
Desai and all, right. But a lot of other names
Sure.
are not known to them at all, and they are unique to these people in Gujarat,
Sure.
not in India, Pakistan, or Bangladesh.
Sure.
For example, Jadwat. Jadwat is two, Jawdat and Jadwal, and Lokhat, and all of these names you see are unique to that region.
Sure.
But now, quickly, 1905, my grandfather in Khator shot that crocodile that was causing a problem for the society.
Right.
And the whole community, men, were standing in, took a beautiful photograph. And behind the photograph, what caught my eye was this big sign, Madrasa Mehfil Islam, Ronakal Islam, right? So we were people that were organized
Already
already
in India.
in India, right? So in other words, this sign is telling me who we are.
Sure.
So when we came to South Africa as traders, one of the first things we did after we established, and there isn't a town, village in the whole of the country where the Muslims went, where they didn't establish the masjid and the madrasa.
Absolutely.
Think about it,
Absolutely.
right? And the madrasa also in time became a school. For example, Pine Street Madrasa was a fine school, South Coast Madrasa, Wellham Madrasa, all these madrasas also served as the first school, right? Now, 1885, my grandfather, my great grandfather, when he came, he was in Johannesburg, and he had what Solly was referring to as, he was a hawker in the mines of Joburg. So what you were saying the other day, we came with very little. Although some of the people, Solly, came as established people. For example, Dada Abdullah, the fellow that had
Sure.
the problem we talked about, and B. Ibrahim Ismail, there were 2 or 3 merchants who had ships.
Yeah. Okay.
They had ships,
Okay.
right? So they were trading along the coastline. So in other words, but mostly they came with very little, right? and they worked their way, like the Soli mentioned about Manjra selling papers, right? So we came, but clearly with the idea what was in our DNA to establish business.
Sure.
So
You know-
small businesses, big businesses, you started off in a small way, right, and then you grew.
So the point we're making is a lot of them already were established in India. They had structures, and you're right, it's madrasas, masjids, and all of that, you know. So when it comes to the Sufi family, the great Sufi Sahib, you know, I think before we go to Sufi Sahib, how much do we know of Basha Pir? Is there a lot we know of him? We don't, huh?
No. You see, in the early days, there were no ulama. There were
Right.
no Maulanas and
Right.
so on and so on. So what you had munshis.
Okay.
A munshi is not a qualified alim. He's not a graduate of a.
Just a general
just
knowledge.
to teach.
Yeah.
Just to teach. Now, for instance, when I was schooling in Niger, I did most of my primary school in Niger. We didn't have a Maulana. So it was my auntie
Right.
who was running the madrasa. So I studied under my auntie. So in the early days, there were not, munshis. And so now, very important is Sufi Sahib.
Yeah.
Because he came here, it was 1895.
So
right?
did he? Which time? 1895.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when he came here, he was sent by his sheikh to come here. So when he came here, he established Riverside, the mosque. But it was not just a masjid, you see. He established 11 mosques, in different towns, all over, one in Botswana, but all over the Natal especially, and one in Cape Town as well. Then he had the madrasa. He had what was called like a dawat khana. That means, I think it was Thursdays, people could come and get medicines free of charge, the dawat khana, right? He had a musafir khana for people coming. He had an orphanage, right? So, and at the same time, he used to go when there was, sailors, when ships were coming. If he heard somebody passed away, he would go and collect the body and bring them and bury them. There's actually a cemetery very few people know near Riverside. It's sort of walled around. There are soldiers buried there. Sailors were buried there. He used to also go to the hospitals to visit sick people. So he did tremendous.
Living
amount
saint. He was a saint of his
Yes,
time.
of his time. So his contribution, you cannot. And at the moment, the Sufi masjids are still running.
Absolutely.
They are still there. Madrasas are still running.
Sure.
Of course, they also established Qabristan. So, I think his contribution is really unparalleled. So,
Absolutely. You just spoke about Musafir Khana. Can you elaborate on the need for Musafir Khana at that time? The culture of always having in every town a Musafir Khana, and what has changed?
All right. See, there are three things you want to remember. The people that came with very little,
Right.
and they were accommodated in these Musafir Khanas for short periods.
Yeah.
But there were also places, for example, like Veridum, where the Katrada and the Gauda families and all took care of these people. So they stayed for a week, for a month, for 3 months, until they could find a place.
Unbelievable.
And when you talk about Falkirk,
Yeah.
Falkirk was way out.
Yeah.
And right next to Falkirk was Charlestown, where my grandparents came
Sure.
from. And there was nothing, right, to talk of. And no electricity, no running water, nothing, right? So Falkirk, Charlestown, Wakastrom. When my grandfather died in the 1919, the Spanish flu, there was nobody around to bury him, right? So, but imagine they were pioneers. They went out into the remote places to establish their businesses.
I think-
And there were two people that come to mind, many of them, but the Mias in Johannesburg helped to establish businesses. So you, Mr. Badat, you came and now you found a place somewhere in Lichtenberg or somewhere, and you told the Mia, I want to open a business there. So the Mias helped you, whether it's with providing you with goods or in a partnership. So the Mias helped, among
A lot of
others,
people, yeah.
they helped a lot of people
Yeah.
set up these small town businesses, right? So you find that the Muslims went into remote areas and set up with the help of these people.
Sure.
In Durban, there was the Lockhart family, the Randerik family, and others did the same thing.
Sure.
So when you find that, I went once to somebody was getting married in a district of Wiener, and even today I said, how did they come here? It was so difficult
And remote.
and remote. But they went, so with the help of these bigger business people who had wholesalers, we were able to establish these small businesses everywhere in the country. The unique feature is that wherever we went, as soon as you set up, as soon as you were okay, you made a masjid and a madrasa. Right? So that was the pioneering spirit, and maybe that blessed us, right, with having. So when they say that who saved, who brought Islam to us, I said the business people, because they made the madrasa and the masjid, and then they imported these Maulanas that came, and they came with the intention, because by that time a lot of these things were closed. So they could only come here if they came as Maulanas, right? So they served their time, but the Dawah dimension was not ever in their minds, because they didn't come with that intention. Very few people, right, had that intention. So we find good people. I mean, Niyaz Niyaz, one of them, they established the school, they established the madrasas, they established the orphanages, right? And some very smart people, I must tell you, in the Muslim community. I mean, the mayors are one of them, where they just acquired land and land. So the highway between Joburg and Pretoria is on their land. The biggest mall in Africa is on their land and still leased. So
I remember in Pitriti, sorry for cutting, I remember in Pitriti as a little boy, the Miyas would come in madrasa and Waterfall Islamic Institute, remember?
Correct.
And they used to all come, and I remember they used to come with their simple cars, simple people, and they used to come and evaluate our curriculum with the Maulana.
But imagine where you were, in a small
Pitriti,
town.
but
like that, the business people went all over. They came with very little. My great-grandfather was a hawker in the mines of Joburg. What is a hawker?
Correct.
Like the spy man standing on the street selling.
Sure.
So we came with little, but we had ideas.
Do you want to share maybe the incident? Yes.
Yeah, okay, just want to come in there.
Okay.
My maternal grandfather
Right.
was from a farm called Moifontein.
Where?
So, Moifontein.
Moifontein.
Oh,
Yeah,
Moifontein.
yeah, not far from Amersfoort. Now, we're just talking about
Amersfoort.
remote area with just a farm
Sure.
shop, nothing around it,
Sure.
right? And then the other thing he's talking about, like the Miyas. Now, we had the Dadabais in Carolina.
Right.
The Dadabais in Carolina had 11 shops. And my father was managing one of the shops.
There's a Dadabais.
Yeah, Dadabais of Carolina. There's
Okay.
11 shops. So the shop when my father was running, it's called Hillside Store.
Right.
There was nothing around it, just a shop.
Sure.
We're talking about remote areas, just a shop, nothing else. And then there was this company in Brighton. At one time, Brighton had this, the trains used to run through Mozambique. They used to stop in Brighton. It was, so it was quite a busy place. So there was this company. It was called, I don't know, Amurin Ismail or Amurin Ibrahim, I'm not quite sure. So my father used to work for them. They used to train people how to manage businesses.
Wow.
So my father learned how to run a
Skill,
business.
teaching
Yes.
a skill.
Yeah. So then he was running that shop there. Then he was also in Kalkroof, which is a mine near Barberton. So he's talking about remote areas, right inside the mine, right? So this is what they did all over. They established little businesses on the farms, even here in Natal. You drive into those very remote areas, you'll see Mr. Khan's shop or something. So they were not afraid to go into this area.
Enterprising spirit.
Enterprising. They went, they put up a shop, nothing around. I mean, he's talking about water lights. We had a well. We used to get water from the well. We used to plant our own vegetables, right? With no electricity.
Gas lamps.
So we used a gas lamp. But we lived and, we grew up in those particular circumstances. So in other words, they were pioneers.
Sure.
They were prepared to go into the remote areas, establish little businesses and so on. And alhamdulillah, many of them emerged from there. And today you have very well established Muslim businesses in the country.
Absolutely.
Of course, also the opposite thing happened, and Babu should know that some of the big businesses were established, collapsed.
Okay.
Now he can tell us many reasons now.
Okay.
One of the people, I wrote a book on Muslim traders in Natal,
Right.
first 100 years. So I didn't start from scratch. There was a book by Bramdo, and there was a book by Manju. So I started there. but I found there were a lot of gaps,
Right.
right? A lot of names, even Jadwa's name was missing from those books. And then, of course,
It's good.
there are a lot of information was missing, a lot of families that came after. So I interviewed 120 people, 120.
Wow.
It took me about 6 months. Now, what I found that some of the one of the people I interviewed came from a very well-established business, well-known business. Okay, I won't mention the name. I think they were in Buria Road. So I was looking for somebody from the family. Where did I find him? I found him in Prince Edward Street, selling T-shirts on the pavement.
Sure. Amazing.
See, from the top, right?
Absolutely.
So we had the opposite.
You see, another thing that you got to remember, that the people that came had this enterprising spirit. So they were ready to go out with very little. Now, even as a child growing up in Charlestown, every holiday, this July and December, right? I mean, we couldn't wait to get there, right? And it was a farm that had very little in terms of infrastructure, right? So, but they not only managed, but what surprised me is that the people, the local people, African people, loved my grandfather, right? And they called him Metlomyama, man with the black eyes, right? Respect for you. So there was a lot of welcoming among the people. What happened? Why didn't we take advantage of that? They loved my grandfather to bits, and I'm sure you have the same story.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you know the same story. They loved them to bits. So we didn't do the Java. Why? Because part of what Maulana was saying today, we came with a culture. And that culture, sadly, affected our future in this country because we had a bad name as I'm now honing down to a very particular group of people,
Right.
the business people, right? And the Aprawas had a bad name for everybody. I Kolchocha, I Kariocha, I Kafrocha, right? And you had a bad name for the white man too. So what I'm trying to say is this, that there was something in our culture which was very, very good, enterprising. You can't go to any town in the
Generous
country.
too, very
eh?
generous.
Very generous.
Right till now,
We
they-
helped,
they-
but
they-
at the
they-
same time,
but very generous.
very generous.
Even the
yeah.
indigenous people, the black people, know that when it comes to generosity, you can't beat the Muslim
Sure,
businessman.
absolutely.
But we have our
absolutely.
failings.
You see, like for example,
The other thing that happened is, you see, we look at the farms, right? These poor African people, I mean, they have very little
Sure.
because some of them just planted maize.
Yeah.
They live on that and so on.
Yeah.
We had near hillside there was a asbestos mine,
Right.
so they had some jobs. They used
Havelock
to-
mines.
Yeah, asbestos mine.
Havelock.
Yeah. So what they used to do, if they had a small saving, they would come to the Muslim businessman and tell him, please keep this money for me. Nothing recorded, absolute honesty. They knew they'll get it back. The farmers in the Transvaal side, they again depended on the harvest. They didn't have cash, so they used to buy on tick
Right.
and say, "I'll pay you after I harvest the crop."
Right.
That was the understanding, and it
Yeah.
worked.
And
Just
only
like that.
sometimes there was crop failures.
Yeah,
So 2 years you have to wait. 3
you have
years.
to wait for your money.
Yeah.
But there was a good relationship. Between- yeah.
absolutely, and that's so true. And also, presently, I'm not going to mention names, but presently there's a family that's outside a colored township, and a friend of mine told me, Salim, you know this family, what they do for us? I said, no, tell me. We run out, we can't pay our lights and water. We go with the bill, they pay it. We can't pay this rent, we pay. And they don't do it. They do it for the whole community, and nobody knows. So there's a lot of good. But sorry, Brother Ibrahim, but I think our mistake was what you said. One of the things that we neglected in this country, and it didn't cross our mind, was to give dawah. Unfortunately,
No, it wasn't in our. It wasn't
in our makeup.
No, it wasn't there in our minds.
Unfortunately,
Because this is not worthy of getting Islam. You understand? We have to admit some of these things. You see, for example, the good name that we have. I'm sitting on a plane one day, and there's a professor from Wits University, African person. So I introduced myself, Jadwat. Oh, Jadwat, he's telling me. So I'm wondering, what is he talking about? He's talking about the Jadwat family in Isipingo. Not my family,
Right.
the same name. So I said, well, what's so good about that? He said, hey, when we were children growing up, every weekend and occasions, the Jadwats would prepare for us. So the children were entertained, they were given. He said, in our memory, we only have good about these people. So they are, see, and they made good names for themselves. And at the same time, for example, we know about Mr. Suleiman, who passed away now, and when Zondo, the Judge Zondo came as a young person,
100%.
you know the story, right?
Yeah.
To his shop to say, I want a job because I need to support my family. And Mr. Suleiman told him, no, you go to school, I'll pay for you, and I'll give your mother what you're going to earn. And when he graduated as a judge, I mean as a lawyer, he came back to pay Suleiman.
Sure.
And Suleiman said, no. Whatever you're going to pay me, let's educate somebody else. Now, there are many things like
Many.
that. Where is Suleiman? Which part of the world he's in? So in the smallest towns, villages, we establish our businesses, right? So Allah has been kind to us,
Through our generosity.
right?
I think,
And has blessed us, right? Now that business community, going back now, I want to tell you something very different. When I first met Anwar Ibrahim, who became Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, he asked me if I knew Randeri. So I thought, what is he talking about, you know? So I said, well, Randeri, my family and this. No, I'm talking about Sheikh Randeri. Who is Sheikh Randeri? So like Muslims go to India, they go to Ajmer and all these people. The Sheikh Randeri in Malaysia is their big saint.
Oh.
So they go to his qabr, right? Who is he? He is from Gujarat, came as a businessman,
To
and they
Malaysia.
credit him for bringing and establishing Islam in Malaysia, 10th century. So how far did we go? The second thing is, as a lesson to us, the business people, we went to, before that, 200-300 years ago, we went to Burma, right? And we established our business. So in other words, we were already setting up businesses and going out. So in Guyana, in Trinidad, in many places I found Muslim business people, right? And Mauritius, Reunion, there's a family of mine in Reunion, business family, in Madagascar and all these places. But this man is telling me that he came as a businessman, established his business, and introduced and gave us Islam. So we honor him. So that time, 1,000 years ago, you were already doing business and dawah. So it was in our genes that we had this thing.
You know, so also if you look back, you see architecture-wise, you see even in the small towns, I know there's always the business, and behind the business you have the house.
Yes.
You know, so I remember Piet Retief, even Manzini, Swaziland, where we were, Piet Retief, always the general dealer shop in front and the family house in the back. And then you also had a masjid,
A madrasa.
a masjid, and around the masjid shops.
Yes.
So the shops generate the income for the masjid. So can you maybe elaborate a bit on that? On
You
that
see, we had better sense when we came
yeah.
than we have now. We never established these institutions without an income generating factor.
Sure.
Like if you look at Green Street, 42 shops
Absolutely.
and 30 flats income. West Street, there are 7 shops and flats. So we had better sense then than we have now. See, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't let your masjid resemble churches and temples. Don't let it be apart from the community. Be inside the community, right? So wherever we went, now for example in Rustenburg, this is an example, they had a nice big land around the masjid, beside the madrasa, right? And it became so valuable. Dr. Token, our colleague, may Allah bless him, founder of South African National Zakat Fund, they made one of the biggest business centers around the masjid because the land was so valuable. Sure. So everywhere we went, you can't go to any town, village in this country without seeing these 3 things.
So was this taken from India, this idea?
Yeah. That's why we had better sense.
So already in India, in our villages, we already had the shops and the masjid.
No, but you also got it in the Middle East.
Okay.
In the Middle East.
Okay.
You'll find big shopping area and then masjid will be
Right in the center.
Okay.
Yeah, the other thing I was talking about, the Musafir Khana, we had one in Sanatan as well.
Right.
So I
In
was,
Sanatan.
yeah, I was high school, I did in Sanatan. So attached to the hostel was a Musafir Khana because you have travelers, right? So from Durban, A lot of these people
Reps,
used to go,
travelers,
reps.
reps.
They used to go to the Transvaal,
Sure.
as reps, whole of Eastern Transvaal.
Sure.
Where would they stay?
I know my grandfather, the shop, corner store, the shop, behind there was a Musafir Khana. And between the home where we lived, my granny, in between there was a Musafir Khana. So people would come
You
through.
see-
My granny would be making the food, the maid would be taking the food through these people, giving them. So it was very much a part of our lives.
But you see,
right?
sorry, another thing is this. We talk about so many things we refer to as the Sunnah. But the essence of the Sunnah is not piety. Technically, it's not a piety.
It's service.
It's a service.
Absolutely.
So the first thing the Prophet ﷺ built, we all know, is the Masjid Nabi. What is the second thing that he did? He
the
built
bazaar,
the market
the
of
marketplace.
Medina.
Correct.
And part of the market of Medina, and who was in charge of the market?
Hazrat Umar.
Hazrat Umar. Imagine we have a romantic idea that they were sitting on the musalla hitting the tasbeehs. He was a busy man looking after the market.
And the 5 people he appointed.
Yeah, and he appointed 5 market masters, Holly.
Sure.
It's a history that we need to really research properly. The 5 market masters were appointed, so you can imagine it was a big market, or became a big market. And 2 of them were ladies. 2 of the market masters were ladies. So you might be surprised, Hazrat Umar appointing 2 ladies as market masters. Yes, half the market traders were women. And why should that come as a surprise? Bibi Khadija was a trader. So we find that Hazrat Umar radiallahu anh had 2 basic. See, we have a romantic idea that these Sahabas, companions were sitting and making the musalla. No, they were fighting wars. The 10 years in Medina, right? So over 60 wars, I don't know how many wars, defensive wars. So when did the Prophet have time to sit? If 60 wars in 10 years, defending great attacks on this nascent community, and when we find that who is in charge of the army? Umar radiallahu anh, training the army where? In the masjid. I'm coming to another point about the masjid. The masjid, the courtyard was where he trained them. And the training of the masjid of these people, you had to, one of the conditions was you had to mount a horse in gallop. So strict. When the horse is running, you have to mount it, right? So the Hazrat Umar was in charge of the army, and one day Hazrat Umar radiallahu anh is complaining to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, I have a problem. In my salah, I'm assembling the army. He's telling the Prophet.
Nothing going up to that.
Yeah.
So he said to the Prophet, I am assembling the army, right? So the Prophet said, that's a good salah, right? Anyway, I want to end up with this thing here to say that how we came as people with very little. And when you look at it today, what Solly has written a book on, about the business people, when we look today, we have made progress by the grace of Allah, by the blessing of Allah, and now people have gone into professions and all that. The big business people, I want to make one point only. There was a period when the wholesalers dominated the business. There were white wholesalers, W.G. Brown and all, about 4 or 5 white wholesalers, and then there was the Muslim wholesalers, like in Durban we had Randeris and Lockhart Brothers and all that. So, but the time of the wholesaler had ended when people started buying directly from the factories. So there was a time when they depended on these wholesalers, both to provide them with goods, but also time to pay.
Sure.
So when they reached a certain level and they could pay, they bought directly from the factories.
Understood.
That killed
The
the
wholesale.
wholesale trade.
The middleman.
So it wasn't
Yeah.
just the Muslim trade,
Yeah.
it was big white traders too.
You know, coming to, okay, so we're looking at KZN as well. When it comes to education, the name that stands out is Amal Sultan. So maybe give us a background of Amal Sultan, and what he, developed here.
Yeah, I think before we go, I just thought about Ismail Park,
Right.
Glendale Sugar Mill,
Yes.
right? So, I mean, here's an enterprising man. He had the sugar mill, right? And
What year was that? Only in the 30s, 40s?
Oh, you're asking. I'm not too good with my memory, but part of this whole Parak family,
Yeah.
right? And what he did, he built a school there for the workers.
Right.
So I think that's the issue. Ibrahim's also referring to is this people, the business people, didn't simply build mosques and madrasas, schools as well, right? And even in sports, I know, for instance, Greytown, they even gave money to build this pavilion, sports pavilion. They built clubs, right? And again, the masjid itself, you see these communities in the towns were very close.
Right.
So if you had a wedding, the whole town was invited,
Right.
right? Not only Muslims. If you had a small town,
Everyone.
everybody.
Wonderful.
Right. What do you look at the masjids? If you look at Ladysmith, you look at Ermelo, all these places, they have this courtyard.
Yes.
So like today people make salamani out of the mosque.
Correct.
At that time they would come out and sit down,
That's true.
right? They had a bench. Some of the courtyard had a fish pond as well, right? Like we look at Ermelo and some other place. Or at least they would sit down, and there's a big courtyard. They would sit down and they would sit and chat. The business people are sitting, or the musallis sitting and talking to each
You know,
other.
it comes so vividly in my memory because of Pitriti. Exactly what you're describing. Maulana Namani was exactly what you're describing, the courtyard.
Yeah. So they would discuss maybe family issues, the business problem,
Sure.
and so on. So it is very close knit community. So I think the architecture of the mosque is very important.
Absolutely.
To provide, how shall I say, space for people to meet and sit down and chat and so on. And so
Sure.
on. So I'm not sure whether the new masjids are doing that.
They don't have that.
They don't.
No. I mean, you think about it. Where's the interaction?
Silence
But-
is golden.
But
Don't talk.
But even you see the architecture before, it was very simple, but it was very in touch with nature. If you look at it, the courtyards, and in the courtyards, I'm thinking of Pitriti pomegranate. I mean, Maulana Namani used to plant all this pomegranate and these flowers, and there were little benches people could sit and talk. Sit and just talk in a courtyard, simple courtyard. But if you look at it now, our masjids are very fancy. A lot of them are very fancy, brick and mortar. But it's also a reflection of the inward man, of the inward space of where we are and where we've come from and where we at. You know, so that is my, because one tap, you'll see they'll pay thousands of rands. This masjid costs us millions and millions of rands. But it's a reflection of our materialism, I think. I mean, there's nothing gaudy. I mean, there's nothing bad with beauty. Allah Ta'ala loves beauty, But it's also something that speaks of our alienation from simplicity sometimes. Do you agree with me?
Right. No, then you're talking about Ahmed Sultan.
Yeah.
So, I mean, also think about R.K. Khan Hospital.
Absolutely.
So what we're saying is that they did not only provide for the Muslims. They looked at the whole community, right? So Ahmed Sultan was not built for Muslims. It was built for the Indian community.
Wonderful.
Because he came from the indented.
Yeah. R.K. Khan was not built for Muslims, but for the community of that area. And they've also built, many people are not aware, they built schools, but they also built classrooms.
Yeah.
Some of the Muslim families built, even in the black community areas, right? They're also involved in the Natal Blind Society, right? Mr. Qasim Bassa was there.
Yeah.
So they were involved in a lot of these community organizations which provided all types of services, whether it was health services, education, and so on. So while they were, involved with Muslim community with regard to masjids and madrasas and so on, at the same time, they also looked at a broader community in which they were living.
Wonderful.
And they provided all types of services to the broader community.
Was there a form of activism amongst the early Muslims that came to South Africa? I know of Gandhi's activism, and they brought Gandhi down. So was that the beginning of our activism, where they stopped the traders from trading? And so was that the beginning, the seeds of the activism? That
You see, we're talking about Natal, right?
Yeah.
Now it's the first political organization that was established in the Indian
NIC.
Congress.
Was that during the time of Gandhi, before or after?
No, he was here.
Oh, he was already
He
here.
was here.
Okay.
He was there, the first meeting.
Okay.
He was present there. So
Okay.
1895. So that time the activism was against the British, who wanted to made it very difficult for them to get business license, residential license. So if you look at the first 30, 40 years, that's the basic fight. So from the NIC, then you had Natal Indian Organization and so others that actually came in.
When we speak of the fight of the traders and that Gandhi took on, on behalf of the traders against the British colony and against the British. But there's an accusation against Gandhi, and the accusation against him was that he didn't really represent the indentured laborers.
Yeah.
And so maybe can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, because remember he was brought in here by the business community,
Right,
right?
right,
And his whole relationship was with the business community.
right,
And remember, he was also from Gujarat,
right,
and the business community was essentially from Gujarat.
right.
Whether they spoke Memon
Sure.
or spoke Gujarati,
And most were Muslim, right?
they were
Okay, yeah.
80%
Yeah.
of the traders
Yeah,
were Muslim.
Sure.
So Gandhi was part of that particular crowd,
Sure.
and he was representing them. And of course, it was the business community which was in the Congress,
Right.
not the indentured laborers.
So who is the? So did the indentured laborers not have a voice at all?
Not, of course, in the early days, because remember
in the early
they,
days,
yeah, they were at the mercy of the yeah,
Of the bosses.
of the
Yeah,
good British. It
correct.
was only later that the people started representing their particular grievances
Right.
and so on. But I think that came a little bit later. Initially, the whole fight was about retaining the businesses
Sure.
and so on and so on.
So when you're looking at the theological strain, the theological line that's coming down here, so we know there's two major schools that we have here. One is from Barelvi, one is the Deoband. Any idea of of the influence, the positive influences that it's had on the community and what it's given, and and the institutions that were built out of these two schools?
Okay, so in early days, of course, you had mainly the Deobandis and Barelvis, and of course Sufi Sahib was here. So
And
that-
he was independent of both, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
The Sufi families, I see them as different
Right,
from
right.
these two,
Right.
because even the Sufi family had very good relations with the Deobandis.
With
They had
both.
no problem.
With both,
Yes.
absolutely.
And if you look at the early ulama like Maulana Ansari, Maulana Khatib, and so on.
Maulana Abdul Qadir.
Ibn Abdul Qadir. Now, what happened? You had, to me, the essential difference was really about the Mawlud,
Sure.
right?
But everyone was doing it at the time. Am I correct?
So at that time, everybody used to attend the Mawlud.
Sure.
And so Maulana Ansari, Maulana Khatib used to be invited. They used to go and speak at the Mawlud. They were invited. Even the Gujarati speaking business people used
the
to
part
have
of-
Mawlud.
correct.
They used to attend it and so on.
Correct.
Later on, of course, things began changing, and of course, the influence came from outside. It came from India. They came from India. So some of them said this is bidah,
Right.
what is bidah, so that created
Haqqani, I think it was Haqqani that started it for me, right?
so some
Yeah.
tension then began,
Sure.
but it was coming from outside
Sure.
of South Africa,
Sure.
and they brought it in. And at one time, there was quite a bit of tension between the two groups, because
Yes.
the one insisted that the milad is a bidah, and the other ones, of course, insisted that we are demonstrating our love for the Prophet. And so on.
Sure.
So you want to come in here, Brian?
Sorry.
You see, Salim and Suleiman, growing up in Durban, right, we had giants in the name of Maulana Abdul Rahman Ansari, West Street, Maulana Abdul Qadir, Maulana Khatib. One came from a supposedly Deobandi, and I don't regard him as that at all, Maulana Ansari. He was a giant, way above people. People don't realize the value of a great man. Maulana Khatib, supposedly from Sunni, but also very open-minded.
Above that, yeah.
And then Maulana Abdul Qadir was of a Sufi background, right?
Wow.
But they three went to all each other's functions. They never
Split
kept
the
away from
community.
any function, Mawlud or whatever. They were there together. They didn't have to talk unity. They were united. Do you know that the three of them went for Hajj together? Together they went for Hajj. How much love there was. And also their broad-mindedness. When we established the Ramadan Taraweeh summaries, while there was this side fighting us that what do we know about tafsir? We shouldn't indulge in tafsir. But we made this Taraweeh summaries 5 minutes before the Taraweeh. Tonight's reading is about this. So we took it to Maulana Ansari. Beta, mashallah, start. We took it up to Maulana Khatib, start. We took it to Maulana Abdul Qadir. He said, you've taken the ocean and put it. There was no question of, we were not doing tafsir. We were basically trying to understand Islam,
Sure.
understand Quran, understand the message. My point is that these people came together. Coming back to the idea of the Musafir Khana, the first masjid that was established, right, by the Prophet ﷺ, and the adjoining market. The market had a place for musafirs. It's called the hammams and all that. So they came from all over, and they would rest there, and they would have the clean up, and they would have a place to stay. So the sunnah was to have a place for refuge, a place for visitors, a place for scholars, a place who came for business. So we took that idea, the sunnah, we brought it to life.
Okay.
When we came here and made, so in Durban we must have had 4 Musafir Khanas, Hafiz Musafir Khana, Randari Musafir Khana, all the Musafir Khanas were. In every town we had.
Always
But in
had.
some small towns like my grandfather in Charlestown, people from Joburg coming to Durban would either stop in Charlestown or stop in Ladysmith.
Right.
The Imam Mahmud family was very, very generous. So they stopped there. We had 2 rooms for visitors. They would wash, one for ladies. So my point is that this is the sunnah.
Sure.
We didn't just create it.
Sure. Okay, I think let's round this up, Prof. So I think is there anything else you want to just add to this regarding the Muslims and their contribution to?
Yeah, I think Babu said it right at the beginning, that the Muslim business community started here, established themselves. They funded the masajid, the madrasas, the organizations. And to this day, it's the business community which is keeping up all those institutions. It's a fact.
Absolutely.
I don't want to be, be personal, but I think the professional community contributes very little.
Okay.
I don't know if Babu agrees with me. The professional community, in my own view, according to my own experience, contribute very little. And I know that because, I know people who are going around collecting money for institutions. They got always from the business people, but very little from the professional community. I'm not sure what the reason for that. Maybe Babu knows that.
You see, one of the complaints that as young people, that when we looked around us, among other things, right, we found that the business people contributed, as Sulaiman had said, but the professionals were somehow had a feeling that they were not obliged to give. They were not the people must contribute. So it was always the business, and that's very sad. And
It's like
and
they
sadly,
knew. It's like they knew the business people will carry the can.
yeah, but
Somehow they
what
knew it.
about their own responsibility?
100%.
So even now, sadly,
It's the same.
we find the same thing, that the professional people, without pointing fingers at any, are people that have enriched. They are very wealthy, some of them,
Sure.
right? But their contribution is not known at all. There is no known. So we don't establish. So the idea of the waqaf with Zainul Qaji Awqaf, right? They try to encourage professional people now to contribute in a small way, but build waqf, right? So the point that Solly is making is very significant, that the professional people have paid very little towards the establishment of institutions in this country.
I think that's. Is there anything else, Prof? That's it. Thank you, Brother Ibrahim and Professor Dango, and we'll see you guys for the next one next week, inshallah. Thank you.
So,
Such a pleasure being with you.